And welcome back to part 4, guys. Okay, so last time we were talking about the HV on-demand crafting area. As you can see, they're mostly just HV machines powered, set with molecular interfaces. The machines export back into interfaces. And most of these, since they're on demand rather than using steam turbines, because, I don't use steam fast enough, I just use turbo diesel because it's on demand. Also, if you don't realize that applied energistics export buses actually take time to prime up when they want to transfer a large amount of steam. I think this is or a large amount of fluids, not only steam. So you can use acceleration cards to do it, but the most common way to notice this is that let's go here, right? So if I take out this export bus, do I have even a steam? I don't. So let me go get a steam bucket and I can demonstrate real quick. Right here. If I break this export bus with acceleration upgrades, right? This is out of power, obviously, because it's not getting any more steam. And I put this fluid export bus in, and I put the acceleration cards back in here with steam. It doesn't actually go at full speed right away. It takes time to prime up. It like inserts a little bit, and then when it realizes, hey, this thing constantly is devouring a lot of steam, the export bus will suddenly start ticking more often. See? And now it's starting to prime up, and now it's starting to fill up on steam as well as filling up on energy. Acceleration cards do make the process happen a little bit faster, but it's just a quick tip to know if you're wondering why. And that's why it was also poorly suited for something that's on-demand crafting, because these machines will turn on, they'll jitter a little bit, they'll run out of power, and we'll try to figure out what's going on. Speaking about running out of power, let me go a big description. So before in GregTech 1.7.10, if you ran out of power, what happens is that the recipe resets. Your inputs don't get consumed for most part. For the most part, inputs don't get consumed. For single block machines, it's just that the power just resets, goes back down to 0, so you can never actually finish it. It's different in GregTech now. If you run out of power, maybe we can demonstrate if I run out of power with the fusion reactor. Okay, so I'm not running out of power. Well then, what happens if you run out of power? It just regresses, kind of like blood magic if you're familiar with that mod, where if you run out of enough LP, it will just reverse the process. So you have a little bit more leeway, but still the same concept. If you don't have enough power for a certain process, it's just not going to finish. That's just how GregTech works. All right, so we're going to leave that running for a little bit, and let's go back here. This last part of the on-demand crafting area, it's less on-demand and more fully automated. Like I said before, you're going to need a lot of various different fluids, as you can tell by like the large amount of 225 fluid export buses that I have going throughout the base. So these ones were fluids that I needed a buffer of, that I need to use, because look at this red alloy, right? Fluid red alloy is used in microcrafting either PIC wafers, and I want to have a buffer for them. Also, once again, that ghost mod is really annoying. Same thing with glowstone. Like, you want liquid glowstone to be a part of certain microcrafting processes, or if you want to start canning it for impulse item ducts, same exact thing. I don't need a large buffer. Those large buffers is stored in these black hole tanks that I have on this end. This is like these are the big chemicals, right? Lots of my steam I'm storing, 1 billion oxygen, a bunch of noble gases. Hydrogen's actually really low. I gotta fix that, or beat the back. Water's there, 365 million millibuckets of cetane boosted diesel. Nitrogen's also here. Helium is also here, and that's an empty one just to stand as a backup. Argon is also here, and then a second tank for steam. Those are the big chemicals that I had to use in my playthrough of the pack. I had creosote in there at one point, but I converted all the creosote to lubricant, and then I used some of that lubricant up, so I never really had the need to store it. These ones are much smaller. These are like 24 buckets, 32 buckets, right? 192 buckets, much smaller size. But you still need these on demand. So I had these fluid extractors constantly running, and hopefully this will be a large enough buffer to let the fluid extractor catch up if my production process needs more of these fluids. And then this last part here, this is just Epichlorohydrin for silicone dust, which is going to make silicone rubber. Silicone rubber, once again, when I said that there's 3 big microcrafting parts in GregTech additions, there's going to be the polymers, which is silicone rubber falls in, there's the circuits, and then there's the petroleum. So now we get to focus a little bit on polymers. Even though the best introduction for polymers while you're playing the pack is polyethylene, silicone rubber is a little bit more endgame, but it's just a better version of rubber for the most part. It uses less material, right, to make a cable. If I want to make an aluminum cable, I have the choice of using rubber, or I can use rubber with polydimethyl siloxane dust, which lets me save up on rubber, which lets me save up on rubber at a lesser amount. I can also use polyvinyl chloride, which is a better version of polydimethyl siloxane because it uses equivalent version because it's only using 72 millibuckets of rubber. When you make a lot of cables, you will be going through a lot of rubber, but for the most part, rubber is really easy to do. So it's kind of like water. You'll always have a large supply of rubber. So for the most part, the only reason I made silicone rubber was I think it was a hard requirement for a machine. I'm actually sorry. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure it was only because it was a hard requirement for a machine. Like I needed silicone rubber plates and would not accept any form of rubber. Either way, it's just a better variant. I still use both towards the end game. I'm completing the pack right now, and I still have an assembler making cables with normal rubber. What I specifically use is silicone. Oh yeah, now I remember. When you want to make a lot of endgame microcrafting, you're going to need neural processing units, right? Neural processing units to make wetware circuits, which I showed you back in the circuit spreadsheet, is one of the highest tier circuits, which can let you make also, which can be formed into wetware assemblies, etc., into wetware supercomputers, etc., into wetware mainframe. And that, the infinite circuit, aka the wetware mainframe, is the highest tier circuit in the game. You need that to make the ultimate battery. Long story short though, this requires a lot of silicone rubber because if you look at the neural processing unit, it requires 64 silicone rubber foil. And you need about, when I did the math, you need about 256 neural processing units to get through the pack. So 256 stacks of silicone rubber foil, that's like, 16K, I think, 16K of silicone rubber foil. So it's worth automating, but you didn't have to really do it till the late game. It's very simple here. I just have silicone dust being exported. And then I also have epichlorohydrin, which is also being produced at a later polymer stage. So, because I said before, one chemical here, epichlorohydrin, is also used for polytetrafluoroethylene. I'll also show you guys that later, probably the same video. I have an advanced autoclave. This was actually just for making, if I can't find it, this advanced autoclave with glass. If you don't know, an autoclave is something that tends to crystallize stuff. I used this autoclave specifically for nether fiber, right here. Quartz fiber in Applied Energistics 2. I called it nether fiber. That sounds kind of gross. But quartz fiber, and it's actually a little bit more expensive in this pack. If you want to have a large ME system, you're going to need to go through a lot of nether quartz, because 4 quartz bolts, right, which comes from 1 quartz rod, is needed. So you get about 8, or you get about you get about 4 bolts. I ever used a small pile nether quartz dust. That was a byproduct. But you get about 4 bolts per quartz. Thing is though, you need 4 bolts to make 1 quartz fiber, and then the recipe got nerfed. You will need 2 quartz fiber for 1 ME glass cable. So by a factor of 4, it got nerfed. So you will need a lot of nether quartz. I mean, not like 2 million nether quartz, but like 50, 60K nether quartz to get through the pack. Actually, 50, 60K might be a lot. Maybe 10 to 20K. And you'll need to do a lot more processing. Once again, don't ever think you need a huge, this is not Aviridia. You don't need Aviridia level resources to get through this pack. Not even close. I don't think I came close to using even 100K of any material. Maybe copper would be the highest, and copper would still be at like, I don't know, maybe 20K. Tungsten steel, osmium, maybe those would be at like 15K. It's just a lot of processing, right? These things can take a minute per process. And if you're just sitting there doing nothing, waiting for these processes, then you're going to be stuck there in a loop. You need to overclock, you need to parallelize your process making. All right, so that's the autoclave. This fluid extractor is just feeding this autoclave here. and it's advanced mixer. It's emptied right now, but when I was talking about it, this was actually exporting a bunch of creosote that I had. So this was actually making the lubricant. And lubricant is used for, well, it has mostly two uses. One is microcrafting uses, like if I wanted to use it for assembly line, or if I wanted to use it as part of a cutting saw to make the cutting saw instead of water. But once again, lubricant is kind of replaced by water. So even though it's only 1 millibucket of lubricant as a cheap cost, why would you ever do that, right? You would always prefer to just use water, because water is free and easy, even though it's 4 times the cost. Infinity divided by 4 is still infinity, so you would always prefer to use water over lubricant. The major cost of lubricant is that when I don't have them up anymore, but I used to have these guys, these diesel engines. And diesel engines are a multi-block structure. They can take diesel, or so any type of diesel generator recipe really. So cetane boosted diesel, if it appears in a diesel generator, these 6 tabs, it'll be valid inside the diesel engine, as you can see right here. So I made 6 of these because these were outputting about, it says EV power, but if you add oxygen into the mix, so kind of like a nitrous oxide type of deal, right? If you add oxygen to a diesel engine, it increases the efficiency and boosts it up to 6K EU per tick. So that increases the efficiency of diesel, because normally it'd be 2K, it goes up to 6K. It's not an actual 300% efficiency multiplier. It will consume diesel at a faster rate. I think I did the math and it came out to be 150% more efficient. Your testing might vary on the mod pack or the version of GregTech Community Edition, but in this specific case, it came out to be 150% in my testing. But yeah, so in this picture, it only has 1 input hatches. I had to actually put down 3 input hatches total, because 1 was for the diesel, 1 was for the oxygen, and 1 would be for the lubricant. So it needs all 3 of those things to run at a boosted rate. Okay. But that was a long ago. I didn't have to use a lot of creosote before, and I still have plenty of lube, so I just left this. This is more of a legacy thing. Now, precision laser engravers, you can tell that these aren't hooked up to anything, because these were also a legacy item as well. Here I had more precision laser engravers that I think I just got rid of. They were mostly moved because I made better precision laser engravers near the plasma turbines, which we're getting to. I know I said that it's almost 4 parts yet, and we're not near plasma turbines. We might get there around part 5, part 6. I don't know, guys. We'll see. All right. So we have the fluids here. That's the HV area for the most on-demand crafting. By the way, you also see here that I have aluminum cables, which can carry up to HV, even though, right, I have these aluminum cables that can carry up to HV. Even though that can carry up to EV, even though I'm using for HV. I just use these because they were cheap and easy for me to make. I had a lot of aluminum at the time, and they also have a loss of 1 per block, so it had a better loss rate than gold did. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna use aluminum. You can use gold, you can use whatever you want really, to match the situation, as long as it doesn't, burn up. It was just personal preference. Okay, so now we're gonna move over into, this is like EV crafting, or this is like HV automated crafting. In this area, I rarely go, aside from these two, right? These 2 interfaces for requests. Most of these things are just always running, or they run whenever I use up a backfill. And what I mean by a backfill is like this, right? This has one of the most important parts in the mid-game and early game, which is polyethylene sheets, aka plastic sheets. Well, they're not really plastic sheets. Yeah, actually, no, they are plastic sheets. So polyethylene is something you'll actually encounter in the mid-game, and this is a highly compressed, little bit advanced variant of what you'll see most setups look like. But basically, polyethylene in this specific block can have 2 specific, I said block, I meant pack, can have 2 specific progenitors, right? You can either get it from naphtha, or you can get it from ethanol. So here's what I mean, right? So you have ethanol, you combine that with sulfuric acid. And remember what I said earlier, how we were getting a lot of ethanol that you can burn as a fuel from all the different saplings, or you can upgrade ethanol into biodiesel. So this is where you kind of had to do some fluid management. You had to split it up. Sometimes you want to divert some of your ethanol, or you want to dedicate most of your ethanol towards biodiesel production. And then every now and then during the mid game, because I didn't have such good control of my fluid processing, I would just take a tank, fill it up with ethanol, just temporarily close off my biodiesel production, fill up with ethanol, and then return that over to process that ethanol into ethylene. It was a occasional batch craft. It was like the equivalent of someone taking, their bucket, going to the well, and, taking up, filling up their bucket from the well. So this is a bit weird. I can't actually find out where the naphtha is. I want to know if that was actually removed. Oh, sorry. So it looks like I was wrong. It looks like naphtha might have been... Yeah, it looks like naphtha might have been changed to epoxy resin, which is another polymer that's better than polyethylene. We'll go back more. Let's reverse that back later. So right now it just seems like, wow, it seems like your only way... Oh, no, look. Okay, so it looks like they changed it. So it has to be either steam cracking various byproducts. Yep, so you get steam cracked naphtha. I lied. So you can still get it from naphtha, but it has to be steam cracked. That's how you get a lot of your ethylene, right? So it's not only naphtha, it's all the other petroleum processes. So I stand corrected. There's two ways. Once again, there's like the quote unquote green recyclable version, the plant-based method from ethanol. And then as you can see here, you're going to end up with ethylene no matter what if you start distilling a lot of petroleum products. Hydrocracked propane, steam cracked propane, light fuel, butane, naphtha. You're all going to get ethylene no matter what. And then ethylene can be multiplied into polyethylene. And polyethylene is actually the usable part, because ethylene itself doesn't really do much. It's just really used as a, what's the best way to word it? It can be used as a gas. I wouldn't really advise that because it has kind of a low output. Well, actually is a pretty impressive output, but it's not as good as biodiesel. Plus, you want to be crafting with your ethylene. You don't want to be using it for power. I mean, there could be that one guy out there, but viral, I beat this pack using ethylene for power. Like, congratulations, dude. That's hella inefficient, but more power to you. So what you can do with ethylene is that you can combine it with hydrogen. You can get, oh, that's hydrocracked. Nope. Yeah, you can combine it with air. And once like I showed before, you can easily get that air compressor and just shove it inside his chemical reactor and get polyethylene. Or you can have multipliers. If you use purified oxygen, you combine that with ethylene, you can have a doubling amount. Or you can use titanium tetrachloride, which is actually the same way how you get titanium later on. But you'll be producing a lot of titanium tetrachloride. So you can divert, siphon off some titanium tetrachloride for your main titanium production to help with your ethylene production. And that's what I mostly did here, because I just have so much titanium tetrachloride. Now, what is polyethylene used for? Because once again, polyethylene is the byproduct of quote unquote doubling ethylene, and by combining titanium tetrachloride, a lot of oxygen, and ethylene. That's actually one big thing. You want it for polyethylene sheets. In this specific pack, polyethylene sheet is the equivalent of plastic. So plastic is good for stuff like making hulls. It especially making industrial foregoing. The earliest time you can get plastic, if I recall correctly, should be LV-MV era, and that's when you can start unlocking industrial foregoing, which is commonly known FE-based machines. I won't go too deep into industrial foregoing, but it had served its use in my pack because I used it as a tree farm. The other more common uses is inside an assembler. If you have a polyethylene assembler, right? Because if you can put it inside an assembler, and it has a variety of large uses. Specifically, you can make hulls. So there's two ways to make most hulls, right? LV, HV, MV, all the way up to ludicrous voltage machine hulls. Max voltage machine hulls and ultra voltage machine hulls will use polytetrafluoroethylene, which is also known as Teflon in the real world. More on that later. But focusing on this, right? It's just two cables and the machine casing. Normally, if you want to make an MV machine hull, you would have to either use extra wrought iron plates and an extra aluminum plate, or you can just use this bottom three, which is the two cables and machine casing, to save up. And trust me, you'll be making a lot of machine hulls. But what you will be making even more of are SMD capacitors. Because if you recall correctly, when I was talking about circuits, every single circuit, every single progenitor circuit, what I mean that by the processors, uses SMD capacitors. And as a quick here, and also give you guys a quick refresher. So each tier of circuit, there are multiple tiers of circuit, but the highest tier of a specific circuit is a mainframe. A mainframe consists of master quantum computers, and each not master quantum computers, each mainframe consists of master computers. It'll vary. Sometimes they'll be called a supercomputer, it'll be called a quantum computer, it'll be called a nanocomputer, or a crystal computer. But these consist of processor assemblies, and those consist of processors. And you can see SMD capacitors are being used all along the way. Even the quantum processor itself has a SMD capacitor. Let me pull up the spreadsheet again, just so that you guys aren't truly confused. What I want to clarify is that this, I guess it's better if I just show you, right? So let me go get the spreadsheet real quick. It'll take me like 2 seconds. And got it. So you can see here a nanoprocessor assembly made out of nanoprocessors is equivalent to a quantum processor in terms of crafting, right? A mainframe is very similar to an elite nanocomputer, which is very similar to a quantum processor. Like all these four can be used, right? All four of these can be used in the same crafting recipe. So if you want to make any insane voltage machinery, you can use a mainframe, you can use an elite nanocomputer, a quantum processor assembly, or a crystal processor. You'll just have to make a crap ton of integrated processors to make the mainframe. Or you can make a simple crystal processor. So that's their form of material efficiency in progression for circuits. All right. Whoa, I didn't realize I actually had 2 of them open. That's super funny. Okay. So that goes back to the circuits, and once again, each basic part of a circuit will always use SMD capacitors and also use SMD transistors, which once again also requires polyethylene. So long story short, polyethylene, no joke, man, no joke. You definitely want to have this thing automated. So what I also showed is that I actually have a fluid storage bus with polyethylene on it, so I can access and pull the polyethylene from this chemical reactor if I needed to reroute it anywhere else around the base. But also as a backup, I also have a fluid solidifier backfilled to make the polyethylene sheets. So if I need to make, you know, more industrial foregoing blocks, if I need to make more plastic circuit boards, it got me. And then this is mostly powered by 2 amps of turbo diesel generators out in the back. Oh, there's actually a third one, but yeah, I think I was taking this apart because I didn't like how it looked. All right, there we go. So this is polyethylene, this is plastic. I can't stress the importance of this, right? You learn to get very familiar with polyethylene. Also, this, once again, I chose the sulfuric acid and ethanol route, not the petroleum. I went green. There's a bunch of diluted sulfuric acid that just gets siphoned off into trash somewhere that I'm using my ME system for. Now, next here we have a small centrifuging. Okay, so if you're wondering why these centrifuges are blue, and I don't know if you're wondering why do your steel chests are heavily dark blue and your bronze chests are blue? Long story short, I found out a week from finishing the pack that there was spray cans. Long story short, let's just say that spray cans are incredibly dangerous, because otherwise you'll end up looking with a really ugly base, uglier than mine already, because you end up with this monstrosity. So be careful. I just kind of went wild with spray cans, as you can see. This was, oh dear God, it's oh my God. All right, let's just try to get through this part really quickly. Just be careful with your spray cans. That's all I can say. Don't run around and spray. This is turbo centrifuges. I use this temporarily just to process a lot of naquadah ores, because naquadah is later. So this is basically just a pulverizer setup and a centrifuging setup. It literally serves no other purpose than that. If I need to centrifuge a large amount of certain byproducts, I will just export them into here, because this has a range from neodymium dust, palladium dust, naquadah dust, because certain parts of these dusts, when you go through the whole entire process, palladium, which is kind of a little bit of a high-end material, right? You can't directly smelt it inside a smelter. You have to pulverize it, or you have to forge hammer it. I just chose to pulverize it, and then when you get all the extra byproducts or the doubling, right, you can either choose to repulverize it again, aka macerate. By the way, macerate and pulverize are synonymous in GregTech. They're basically the same thing. So you can macerate again to get an impure pile. And the only way to process this impure pile, all of them, is centrifuges. So you will need a large amount of centrifuges if you want to have a maximizing ore byproduct methodology. This brings me up to a second point. That's the difference. The first difference was that there's oil in a normal world. There is no oil in a skyblock. The second difference is that because we're in a skyblock and we have an infinite passive amount of resources operating all the time, which I can show you later, we'll almost get there. But since we're getting a passive amount of material constantly all the time, running, you don't really need to, what's the best way to word it? You don't need to maximize your efficiency, right? Like, you don't need so much to double everything. Even the rare materials like iridium, like I don't care about that. I'm not gonna double my iridium. I have 155k iridium just chilling here, man. Another 55k in the chunks and 14k is ender iridium. These are basically the same thing. One's just sourced from sand, one sourced from gravel, one sourced from endstone. The biggest difference between all of them is just there is no difference between them. I would throw these things straight into the furnace if I can for a 1-for-1. I'm happy to have a 1-for-1. But unfortunately, that's the easy way out. You will have to build these because some of these cannot be directly smelted. In fact, you know what? Let's finish this chunk up and we'll go to the ore processing setup. So once again, I have this fluid solidifier, gel toluene. I have a storage bus on here just to manage the various so I can just pull it out as a buffer. Toluene is mostly just used for TNT. In fact, it's funny, the gel toluene doesn't seem to appear in JEI. Yeah, it does not. But right, you get the gel version. You can also have a more efficient variant with a chemical reactor with sugar and tiny pile of polyethylene. I don't really care. You get this easy enough anyway, so I didn't think there was a point in multiplying it. But yep, you get this to make TNT. And there's no other way to make TNT, right? I checked. This is the only way to make TNT. And you need TNT because the explosion compressor is used for certain recipes specifically, right? For... Where are you at? Here we go. Iridium alloy plates, which is an Endgame microcrafting piece. When we go to the explosion compressor, I'll cover that there. All right, so this is EV. This is the way to get my tungsten dust. It's just an EV electrolyzer powered by an aqueduct reactor. Because when you first make this transition to get tungsten, you need tungsten to actually make a couple of extreme voltage generators. Diesel engine being an exception and maybe a large steam turbine being another exception. You actually need to transform up. So that's why there's kind of a bit of dead space here. Because I had 4 turbo diesel generators powering this advanced electrolyzer for tungsten before I moved to an aqueduct reactor. Here, tungstate dust, very simple recipe. You get a bunch of oxygen, tungsten, it's 7. It uses a lot of hydrogen. So if you are going to start processing a lot of tungsten, just be aware of your hydrogen reserves. Okay, next, this is for Styrene Butadiene. It's kind of weird how Top recognizes the localization. I'm not sure if that's Top's fault or GregTech Community Edition's fault. If I put my money on it, it would be on Top. So let's go it goes from bottom up, right? So at the very bottom, we have benzene and ethylene, which makes styrene. Now, if you're wondering where those come from, that's from the petroleum process, right, that we had earlier. Benzene and ethylene can both be byproducts of the distillation towers. You just need to steam crack a couple of things, right? And it'll take steam crack naphtha, heavy fuel, or light fuel to get it. You can also get it from wood tar, and wood tar is sourced from the pyrolysis oven. But at the time, I just figured that, look, it would be more efficient if I just get heavy oil from the pyrolysis oven and then turn those into the various byproducts. Because the heavy oil can be distilled into light fuel, heavy fuel, etc. So this will get more bang for my buck rather than going the wood tar route. But very early on, wood tar route is also perfectly doable because it goes straight into benzene. Just, it distills straight into benzene, so you don't even need to worry about making other distillation towers for your, or steam cracking units. Now, so yep, this basically is 2 for 1. The issue is just you need to place to store the liquid constantly. Other than that, then you're really easy to make styrene butadiene rubber. And styrene butadiene rubber, it's actually just like other rubbers. It falls a part of that polymer microcrafting process where you had rubber, silicone rubber, styrene butadiene rubber. This is actually not necessary for the majority of the pack, but there is a hard requirement for styrene butadiene rubber when it comes to the assembly line, and you need to start making conveyor modules of much higher tiers. It does not accept any other rubber. So it doesn't take normal rubber, silicone rubber. So this kind of caught me off guard towards the end game. You will need to be using this towards the end. And yeah, this is just a middle byproduct, right? You combine styrene, butadiene, and butadiene once again is also I'm having that exported from my ME system because this is also, once again, a steam cracked distillation byproduct. And you get the rubber dust, dries up, and then you can combine that rubber dust with sulfur to get this amount. And I just have this tungsten steel drum that ends up being the buffer in case I need it. Here, this fluid extractor, this is a temporary ad hoc fluid extractor setup that actually doesn't do anything with automation. All right, so now this is the last part of polymers, then we'll go to ore processing. All right, so what's the best way to word it? In fact, okay, sorry guys, I lied again to you. We'll probably do ore processing next episode because it's already getting long. So I'll cover polymers real quick. And this is epoxy resin. Well, this is epoxy resin, and this is also epoxy resin sheets and then fiber reinforced epoxy resin sheets. So what are epoxy resin sheets even used for? Circuits. Once again, it all boils down to circuits. Circuits are super annoying, but you need circuits. Once again, want to reiterate, circuits is one of the big microcrafting processes that's going to tie into all the other parts of other GregTech machines and other GregTech blocks. You can thank GregTech Additions for this. So let's start off with epoxy resin. We got the epoxy resin sheet. The big use for them is when you combine them with a chemical reactor, you can get advanced boards, and these advanced boards are good for nanoprocessors. So at the base level, nanoprocessors can make HV, because it's HV level materials, right? Emitters or HV level machines. And it can also be made into nanoprocessor assemblies, etc. That's just the epoxy circuit board. There's a next level though, because you can just directly fluid solidify epoxy resin into epoxy resin sheets, or you can give it a further process, and by bathing raw carbon fibers in epoxy resin, you can get fiber reinforced epoxy resin sheets. And then these are used for extreme circuit boards. So this is EV level circuits that you can use these for, right? So these are quantum processors versus nano processors that were in advanced. These are in extreme, also known for extreme voltage. How do I make this? This is also kind of simple. You have glycerol, you have hydrochloric acid, and you have epichlorohydrin. As I demonstrated earlier, epichlorohydrin was also being used for silicone rubber, which is why I also actually have a storage bus on here so I can use epichlorohydrin for different processes. In fact, epichlorohydrin, which is glycerol and hydrochloric acid. And if you want to know where I'm getting all my glycerol is actually a byproduct from my biodiesel setup. So that's a lot. That's a lot of glycerol on standby. Plenty of glycerol. Hydrochloric acid is actually very simple. I think the recipe that I chose to use was just combining hydrogen and chlorine, right? Hydrogen and chlorine. I get a lot of chlorine from just electrolyzing salt. In fact, you need to electrolyze salt anyways because you want that for your magnesium. You want chlorine anyways when you make titanium tetrachloride that I showed earlier, which is the main way of getting titanium in the pack. So you're going to have chlorine automated. So once you have chlorine automated, you can combine that too in order to get epichlorohydrin. In fact, kind of similar to the fluid buffers over there with the tanks, this is where my hydrochloric acid setup is. It's funny because instead of actually having a tank here, which I should have a tank here, I literally just put the storage bus, so it's just reading the external buffer of the advanced chemical reactor. So it's pulling it out from there, right? Jamming it into this chemical reactor, giving us epichlorohydrin. Now, this chemical reactor already auto outputs epichlorohydrin into, well, there's a garbage bin in the way. The main reason why there's a garbage bin in the way is because this recipe has a water byproduct, right? So this is going to be outputting to the left, and I have a fluid filter here. This only allows for water. I can't really get it because this fluid garbage bin needs to take a key note from diet hoppers. It takes up the entire block instead of just taking up specifically its only bounding box. Anyways, so that's step 1 of the process for epoxy resin. Step 2 of the process is that we actually need to get bisphenol. We can also ignore the water that gets drained anyway and trashed somewhere else. Bisphenol also requires hydrochloric acid. So if you are doing the setup, you need to have it so your hydrochloric acid goes into 2 chemical reactors. And if you're wondering, how the hell do you do this, right? How is this even possible to do if you don't have applied energistics? Because you will be asked to do some of this complex fluid management before applied energistics. And I mean, honestly, it's not that bad. You just need to not be afraid of having dedicated machines, right? These machines are sitting here with these and it may seem like, oh my god, this is overkill with all these machines. It's not. Like that's part of the process. These machines are only hydrochloric acid machines. These machines are only acetone machines, phenol machines. That's how they operate, right? They need to be dedicated for one process at a time. And it's kind of cool because the end result is that you have these multi-block structures. And I would definitely classify this as multi-block, even though it's a bunch of single block machines forming up to do one thing. I kind of prefer this over to something like immersive engineering, which is fine. People have their own opinions, but I prefer to something like immersive engineering because immersive engineering has a big multi-block that looks really pretty, but it's just a simple input-output. This has a lot more moving parts. You can compact this, you can expand it, you can scale it different ways. There's a lot more fun, and it's a lot more immersive as like, oh my god, you're a factory manager trying to handle all these processing lines. Now, once you get what happens here is that you take the bisphenol A, and phenol is a byproduct, right? Phenol is a byproduct either from wood tar, because you can either just distill wood tar, right? From a pyrolysis oven, or it's also a byproduct of distilling heavy fuel. So you can have a distillation of heavy fuel, and remember, I produce a lot of heavy fuel over there inside the distillation towers. So I have a lot of phenol in a central repository. The biggest issue is that since I have applied energistics to centralize all my fluid storage, it's easier to do. It's kind of a nightmare early on. It's almost as bad as Thaumcraft Alchemy in 1.7.10 before Thaumic Energistics. You know how like when you finally unlock Thaumic Energistics, a lot of your Thaumcraft automation tends to scale up? Kind of the same concept here. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to fluid management that once again gets helped out a lot by applied energistics. Now, you have bisphenol A. It feeds into the second advanced chemical reactor, which is, sodium hydroxide dust and epichlorohydrin. Epichlorohydrin, like we talked about, is being already made here. And that just makes us epoxy resin and salt water. I decided to have this auto outputs into 3 different things. So this auto outputs epoxy resin, which will backstop, right? This will fill up on epoxy resin. But where does the salt water go? Well, once this empties out, the excess salt water will go into this advanced electrolyzer, and I'll just electrolyze the salt water away. Because when you electrolyze salt water, hey look, you get the sodium hydroxide back, right? So I can kind of recycle the sodium hydroxide in the system. It also gives you extra chlorine that you need for the hydrochloric acid. So you are recycling a fair amount of stuff if you have the best use. I mean, I could have honestly just also put a fluid garbage bin for salt water, because this is barely used. I barely miss the sodium hydroxide anyway. I already use a ton of sodium hydroxide, tiny piles of it, when I make biodiesel, right? So I already have this process down pat. And tiny piles, sodium hydroxide is really easy to make. It's literally just reacting sodium with water. And you get tons of sodium from various sources from electrolyzing, such as clay, such as sodalite, such as lazurite, and you get those upon hundreds of thousands. Yeah, so that's epoxy resin. In part 5, guys, I'll go over my ore processing. We'll also go over more of these standalone processes here. And then maybe part 6, part 7, I'm just adding more parts as we go along. We'll get over to the fusion reactor. See you guys in a bit.